I just got a statement from Charles Allen. He is the D.C. Ward 6 council member. Among other things, he says this is wrong, extreme, outrageous, dangerous, and he gives by way of example this. National Guard soldiers are trained for warfare and natural disasters, not for community policing. Every American should be deeply concerned with what they are witnessing today. And let me play for you what D.C.'s Mayor Muriel Bowser had to say on this network just last night.
We are not experiencing a crime spike. One reason I wanted to be here today is to let people know that their nation's capital is among the most beautiful and best cities in the world. It's well run. We have excellent schools, the #1 park system. We have experienced rises in tourism compared to before the pandemic. So people are coming to our capital. They're starting business in our capital, and they're raising families in our capital. And any comparison to a war-torn country is hyperbolic and false.
What do you see going on here, Eddie?
Well, to be honest with you, Chris, I think he's trying to move the Epstein story off the front page. He's trying to get us to pay attention to something else. He doesn't want us to ask questions about why is Maxwell in a country club prison now. He doesn't want us to begin to ask, where are the files again? He's trying to move that story off the front page and turn our attention by way of his particular racial dog whistles to crime in a city that's predominantly black, or at least it was predominantly black. So I think we need to be clear about what he's doing. And I think we need to be clear about the implication for democracy in Washington, D.C., for the country. What does it mean that Donald Trump singles out crime in these areas? He's not talking about the fact that guns are flooding in from Virginia and Maryland. He's not talking about gun control laws, right? He's just going to talk about these wild youth. Remember, that's almost the same language that he used around the Central Park Five. And so I want us to be very, very clear and careful as we talk about this. Let's not fall for the trap that he's setting for us, so that we ignore what he's really trying to get us to ignore, and then fall for this kind of cultural war nonsense that he's perpetuating and putting forward.
And in fact, Ken, he's already starting to dispatch FBI agents into D.C. What do we know about that?
Yeah, a number of them have come from the FBI's Washington field office, Chris, where presumably they were doing other jobs and now they're being asked to patrol. And look, here's the thing. You've already established that what President Trump said about crime numbers in D.C. is flatly wrong. If you look at the 25 most dangerous cities in the United States, D.C. doesn't appear on that list. And, there are allegations that D.C. police have been playing games with crime statistics, but you can't hide murders. And murder is down dramatically from just a couple of years ago. That said, there is a perception in D.C. that there is greater disorder on the streets since the pandemic. Where we work at MSNBC near Union Station, there's a lot of empty storefronts where there didn't used to be. There are more homeless people. There's more vagrancy. That does not, I've talked to criminologists about this, that does not necessarily equal more crime, but it creates a perception that the city is unsafe. And Trump is exploiting that and reacting to that. But that's not an issue that's going to be solved by the National Guard or by the FBI or by more federal officers on the streets, nor is the issue of juvenile crime. There's also a legitimate concern in D.C. that the legal system is not tough enough on juvenile offenders who commit violent crimes. And the U.S. Attorney mentioned that at the news conference, Jeanine Pirro. But she was very upfront about the fact that if you want to change that, you have to change the law. There's nothing about what Donald Trump is doing today that's going to influence how the legal system treats 16-year-olds who commit gun crimes. And so, again, a lot of people are looking at this and saying this is performative.
Well, there's a lot of details, David, that we know absolutely nothing about, and we have not been told anything about. A succession of people got up in front of the podium and said things. None of them were about how this was actually going to happen. I do want to say that Daniel Hodges, who was one of the D.C. police officers who defended the Capitol on January 6th, made a similar point to what the D.C. council member did. He said, this is an extremely expensive photo op, and you're paying for it. That is his message to Americans. But I guess the question is, does that message win out? Or does Donald Trump's message, as if all of a sudden this is this dystopia where crime is rampant and murderers are running the streets at will, does that win out?
Well, look, if you're a victim of violent crime or you feel unsafe, even though you haven't been a victim, then statistics aren't going to matter, right? The fact that crime has been coming down post-pandemic isn't going to matter. And look, I lived on Capitol Hill for 20 years. My wife and I are raising our 2 young boys on Capitol Hill in Washington. If we felt it was incredibly unsafe, we wouldn't be doing that. That being said, crime spiked during the first year of the pandemic when Donald Trump was in office, and it was allowed to proliferate. Actions like this might have actually made more sense during the first year of the pandemic than they do now. Crime continued to go up in the first year or so of the Biden administration. Even Joe Biden himself worked with Republicans in Congress to kill a D.C. government criminal justice reform law because they felt it was going to be too soft on criminals and not reduce violent crime. And so if we had more details about this, I mean, Dan, sort of raised a lot of the important points here about what we know and what we don't know. If we had more details about the deployments and the goals and how different law and federal law enforcement agencies were going to be utilized, then there might be a better case to make here. We might be able to fully understand it, even if we had, constitutional disagreements or principled disagreements. But there's just so much we don't know. I will say, though, for the past couple of years, unlike before the pandemic, D.C. did not feel as safe as it was. I knew people personally who were victims of horribly violent crimes, things that I didn't know before. And so there was and have been issues. I think the question is, how do we get to that? The most interesting thing Donald Trump said in that hour plus that he spoke was he doesn't think the city needs more police officers. And that's a very interesting approach. It's true we need tougher penalties for violent criminals, particularly youth. But the fact that the president doesn't think we need more police, particularly when federal action is supposed to be limited and not permanent, was very interesting. I'm curious to see what the mayor and the D.C. council thinks about that.
Well, Eddie, I mean, again, if there were details, and I didn't really hear any, maybe the closest we got was a suggestion by the president that somehow, in his view, police need to be empowered because up until now, they've just been taking it. Take a listen.
I've watched them. Police are standing, and they're told, don't do anything under any search. So and you can see they want to get at it. And they're standing there, and people are spitting in their face, and they're not allowed to do anything. But now they are allowed to do whatever the hell they want.
Whatever the hell they want, as if police have been not doing anything before this, Eddie. What do you make of that? Whatever the hell they want.
Chris, to be honest with you, I'm trying to hold my temper. I think there's an ongoing argument that he's having in his head with Black Lives Matter. There's an ongoing argument that he's having with the questions around criminal justice reform and police reform. It's interesting that he really doesn't really care about what's actually happening in D.C. on a certain level, because he's not trying to get at the underlying root causes. He's not looking at examples of how to address rising crime rates that doesn't require a form of policing that leads to increased incarcerality and the like. Let's look at what's going on in Baltimore. Let's look at what's happening actually in places like Baltimore and Chicago, right? So part of what we have to do is to understand. And Oakland. We have to understand this, Chris, within the context of Donald Trump's racial politics and within the context of his effort to get Epstein off the front pages. I understand David's point. But when we try to treat this as a rational response, then we lose sight of the actual politics that's being played here. And he's actually trying to give his base red meat to get them off of the Epstein story, and it's on the backs of citizens in Washington, D.C. He's going to undermine the democratic process in the district. And so I understand what David is trying to say, but we need to be clear about what Donald Trump is doing.